thank you, Ted and ISTE, for this opportunity. When I first got the email, I was super relieved and excited. I was in my second year of my dream job as a central office administrator. That's my dream job, it's true. And I'd still never had a professional conversation about my goals and accomplishments, but it seemed like it was finally about to happen. The email read, "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you after the new year." I'd been working toward this job for what felt like my entire life, and to finally have it was the ultimate confirmation of everything I'd hoped was true about myself, that I was good, and that I deserved this top job. So I walked down to that meeting with a spring in my step, holding a printout of my goals and accomplishments. When I walked into my boss's office, I handed him that printout and I sat down, big smile on my face. He said, "I don't want to beat around the bush. It's not working out, you're not a good fit, and I'm not renewing your contract." I'd just gotten fired. I'll never, ever forget that feeling. My entire body became numb, and I entered what can only be described as some sort of dream state. But it didn't end there. No, he went on to say that I'm better suited to middle management and that I should aim lower so that I could see how people get things done. I think I said about 10 words the entire time. To say that I was blindsided, major understatement. His words and the way he described my lack of potential called into question all of my prior accomplishments, all of the leadership work I'd done over the past several years, not to mention all of my hopes for the future. It even called into question who I was as a person. Now, this is not the kind of information that most people would go shouting from the rooftops, but I feel like it's important to share because in education, we're not taught how to deal with failure. And because of this, we're not setting our students, teachers, and administrators up for success. Many fields embrace failure, but not us. I once did an activity with a group of educators, and the entire room full of teachers provided example after example of ways in which their schools and districts were failure averse. So what do? Well, after I was fired, I craved other stories of failure. I mainly watched TED Talks and YouTube videos. So these are some of my old standbys. We've got J.K. Rowling's 2008 Harvard commencement address, Elizabeth Gilbert TED Talk, Nick Foles talking about failure just after having won the Super Bowl, Will Smith, and then an amazing Procter & Gamble commercial from the Olympics a few years ago. I'm telling you, I was desperate. I also read articles and listened to podcasts. But perhaps most powerful for me was hearing the story of a successful older friend's very similar experience of professional failure. He was a retired superintendent, and in my eyes, had achieved the pinnacle of success as an educator. He was well respected, had achieved some amazing things in his district, and yet what I didn't know is that he had been fired from an earlier superintendency job. He too had been devastated and questioned his entire career. And yet, fast forward several years later, and he was retiring to great accolades. Him sharing this story with me made me pause, for he had given me hope. One benefit I've learned about sharing failure is that it becomes a way of providing hope to others and reminding them that failure is part of the shared human experience. Several months after my firing, I decided to put together a talk on failure. And so as part of that talk, I reached out to friends and family who I considered to be successful and asked them to share their stories of failure with me. Now, two of the friends who I asked are probably my most conventionally successful friends. They make a lot of money at high-profile jobs in downtown Chicago. And yet, strikingly, they both responded that they had never failed at anything. Thanks, that was helpful. But I found this to be particularly devastating because it seemed to uphold the narrative that total success is indeed possible for some people. What was wrong with me then? Of the responses I received, the ones that provided a light in the darkness were those from friends and family who were able to share their stories with me. So they recorded those stories on this flip grid. I've got a couple of Ironman finishers in there. My friend Michael works for Microsoft as an Xbox marketer. My sister-in-law Danielle is a successful psychiatrist. My brother Ross is a college professor. My mom is even in there, retired pharmacist. Thanks, Mom. These people provided me with hope. Discussing failure authentically is especially important for kids because young people without a lot of life experiences are especially vulnerable to feelings of shame and inadequacy when they fail. And some of the most inspirational examples of creative ways in which people are trying to help kids come from high schools and universities. At New Trier High School, a high-performing school in the wealthy northern suburbs of Chicago, 16-year-old Alex Rubenstein created a mural of mistakes. This permanent art installation features anonymous admissions of mistakes and failure, written on blackboard paint to symbolize the possibility of erasing life's disappointments and forging new paths. The entire piece was then splashed with additional paint to illustrate the messiness of life. Along the same lines, several prominent universities, including Princeton, Smith, Penn, and Harvard, have designed programs highlighting and facilitating the sharing of failure stories. Depending on the program, there are successful alumni and academic staff speak about failure. There are failure seminars, visual failure installations. Although different, the focal point and the power of these initiatives lie in the sharing of failure stories. This is an example from University of Pennsylvania, right here in Philadelphia. This is their wall of rejection. This entire wall is filled with students' photos and admissions of their mistakes and failures by these high-performing Penn students written on colorful note cards. But why are we waiting until the university level to teach these important life lessons? Understanding that failure is part of the shared human experience and that talking about it actually makes it better is information that all students, teachers, and administrators need to have right now. Unfortunately, we're conditioned to think of failure as weakness and sharing about it as embarrassing. I still struggle with shame about what happened to me. And getting here today, to this point, hasn't been easy. But what if we reframed it? And dealing with failure became a powerful educational tool. And then sharing this tool becomes an act of generosity to others and a service to ourselves. Think about your sphere of influence in education. Who might listen to you and benefit from hearing about mistakes you've made or failures you've experienced in your life? What power might lie in becoming more honest, brave, humble, and in learning life lessons through sharing our failures? We should be modeling these qualities for our students and staff and showing them through our own example that it's okay to fail. But how do you get started? Who's your first audience? Try finding someone you know will be supportive, but maybe who doesn't know your story. You can tell them you're practicing your failure muscle. Some things I'd like to try next year include partnering with classroom teachers to design SEL lessons on failure, and with principals to facilitate staff meetings exploring the concept of embracing and sharing failure. We should try to make these regular conversations, but don't expect others to be comfortable right away, because they won't be. This is really hard for people to talk about. Other things I'd like to try include creating classroom murals of mistakes and creating staff failure Flipgrid video collages, where teachers and administrators share their stories of failure. I actually got so excited about this that last week I made a failure Flipgrid video, and I ran next door where my friend Charlie was teaching summer school, and I asked him to be my first teacher failure video. And administrators, we can take a page out of Google X, Procter & Gamble, and other big companies and publicly reward employees who fail big when trying something new. I know that education is high stakes, but so is preparing our students for this inevitable shared human experience. The end of my story isn't yet written. I've gone on to a new job that I love, but I know that I'm vulnerable and that I might fail again. In fact, I know that I will fail again. Hopefully not in such a monumental, life-altering way, but I will fail again. And you can bet that I'll be shouting it from the rooftops. You're welcome. Thank you.